Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I have with me today my four daughters because this is episode 300. And so I had asked them, I had prepped them to let's just talk about what was it like having a mom, growing up, having a mom who was a therapist, and then particularly because I think when you guys were still fairly young, I made the transition to be a CSAT and work on, sex addiction, sexual health and wellness. And so I wanted to just talk about what that was like, both growing up with a mom who was a therapist, as well as a mom growing up who's working on sexual health and wellness. And I promised daughter number 5, who I've talked about, I did not give birth to her, but it's daughter number 4's friend. She was going to join us today too. And then daughter number 3 decided to go skiing today, and it was snowing, and she promised she would be back in time, and she was late. And daughter number 5 had to leave. She had plans. So I told her I would let everybody know that it was daughter number 3's fault, and I'll record something with her tomorrow because she was prepped. So you know me, and then you guys can introduce yourselves. Some of them said they want to be anonymous. I don't know if that's true because you can see their face.
This ain't anonymous.
But why don't we start with daughter number 1?
Hi, my name's Alex.
And she's daughter number 1.
I'm daughter number 1.
Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm daughter number 2.
Bro.
I'm Kelly, and I'm
Chill.
daughter number 3, and you can blame me.
Most of the things that need to be blamed on somebody is daughter number 3.
Yes.
I'm daughter number 4, Grace. I found daughter number 5.
Yes, you brought daughter number 5 in.
Yes.
Okay, so who wants to start? Did one of you guys, I know they prepped, they talked to each other, maybe except daughter number 3 didn't prep. Oh, they prepped in the car on the way home.
Should we go through the
They prepped on the
questions?
slopes. Yeah, we don't have to go through every question. I prepped them by getting some questions ready for them. Not that we had to answer all of them, but just so they had some questions to be prepared for. So do we want to just kind of start? Just like personal reflections from your childhood, like I talked about, how did having a mom who worked as a therapist impact your understanding of emotions or relationships growing up? Or were there times when you felt that my work influenced the way I parented, for good or bad? And if so, what's that like? Did you ever feel like our family dynamics were different because of the nature of my work? Let's just do some personal childhood reflections. You can add anything you want to that.
I think to start off, maybe we'll just start off with a little funny story.
Love it.
Growing up, especially like when we were like elementary school age, we knew what our mom did for work, but the main title was like a sex addiction therapist. But when I'm in 3rd grade,
Addiction's
important.
Very
thank you.
important part.
But when you're in 3rd grade and people ask what your mom does, growing up in Utah, most women or moms are not full-time employees. They do not work. But also when they ask what your mom does, a 3rd grader, I'm not going to say the word sex. That's weird. I don't even know what sex, well, I did know what sex means because my mom's a sex addiction therapist. I had the talk of the birds and the bees when I was in kindergarten. But I think we all had separate stories of what our mom did, whether she was a hairstylist or a nail lady, real estate agent. She had all the jobs. She was a woman of many talents. And then as all sisters started to kind of have the same teachers, the teachers were like, I'm so confused by what your mom does, because she's a flight attendant, she's a hairstylist, she's a bit about
She does it all.
She does it all. And she cooks, and she feeds y'all.
And to be clear, I did not know this was happening until they reached out and asked me to come to Parent Work Day.
Yes.
And the night before, I'm prepping to go to the elementary school to talk about what I do for work. And that's when my kids decided to get honest and tell me that what I do is not what anyone at the elementary school knew that I did.
Well, I think I came up and I said, "You do hair, right?" So
No,
that's
you
what
said,
your job is.
"Hey, by the way, just so you know, I told them that you're a hairstylist."
So make sure your hair looks real good that day.
Make sure you bring your scissors.
And then I think, Sydney, you were like, "I said you're a real estate agent."
To be honest, I don't know.
So that's when the truth came out, is when I'm preparing to go. And, that kind of blew what I was prepared to do, because they lied to their teachers about what I did for work, and I was not prepared for that.
But at the end of the school day, I did hear the gossip that was the best little session for the day, was going to Jackie Pack's little therapy session. Was the best one of the day.
It was fun. It was age appropriate for
Very
all
age-appropriate.
elementary school children.
I also have the reflection of you coming up to me and saying, "Hey, we're gonna go get lunch today. Like, go get ready." And I was so stoked. I was like, "We're gonna go to Chili's. Like, I love the Chili's. This is gonna be great." I go there. No, it turns into the sex talk, and the man behind us is laughing as Jackie is going into an in-depth explanation of the birds and the bees, as I'm like full
Eating
body
your
cringing.
chocolate lava cake.
Yeah, as I'm trying to enjoy my lava cake.
I think my sex talk tops it all. We went to a Mexican restaurant that was going out of business, and so we were the only ones in there, and I made every single one
On
of
like
you
a
come with
Tuesday?
us. And then all the little waiters were giggling and laughing. We're talking about
The birds and the
sex.
bees.
I did give you the option whether you wanted to just go one-on-one or if you wanted your sisters to
No,
come.
it was an everybody thing.
It was an everybody thing.
I got a personal explanation. Sydney got a personal explanation. And
Me and Alex both went independently with Mom and some of our friends to different restaurants.
Yes. And then we got a whole group explanation.
Yes.
So
Then we went to maturation
in
elementary school.
Yeah.
But they don't really teach. Oh, but then we had the
safe
after
sex
school
or anything
maturation
about
with
that
my
maturation.
friends, where I went to the Chili's and had the talk again. So
Alex loves Chili's.
I do love the Chili's.
Do you
Sponsor
still-
this podcast.
They're not sponsored.
Chili's.
Blur the name out.
What is that?
They're not
Triple
sponsored
Dipper?
by us.
Oh, let's go on to a question.
Well, my reflection, I will say,
Yeah, you go.
I
like,
have more reflections. Kelly.
as like the youngest and growing up in like a hyper religious, not to bring up religious trauma,
Community.
but like environment with our neighborhood and even like the education system, I knew that like, not just saying like because my mom was a therapist, but like her morals and values as a parent, I knew was always kind of different from the churches and like my peers, and like having that like more open outlook on struggles or judgmental.
True.
I really liked this question. It said, "Did you ever feel like you had insider knowledge on things your friends were clueless about?" And I think yes, as a kid whose mom is a therapist, I always felt like I kind of knew what mental health was from a very young age, and I probably even had a more knowledge about like that our world was in a mental health crisis before like the world kind of acknowledged that. I think finally now in 2020, 2024, whatever it is, it's 2025 now.
Welcome.
People are now accepting that like there is a mental health crisis and this is a problem and we should address this. But I feel like from a very young age, I knew that just because my mom works so closely with people who are struggling and dealing with addiction and things like that. But anytime I'm talking to a friend or even a random coworker that I'm in the lunchroom with and I don't necessarily want to have a conversation, but my AirPods aren't working and I end up having a conversation with them, it turns into a therapy session. And then afterwards, they're always like, "Wow, you should be a therapist when you grow up." Or like, "If you ever had a career change, you should be a therapist." And my only answer to that is, "Oh, well, my mom's a therapist. I'm just really good at talking like my mother." But yes, I do think we kind of all growing up had a little bit more knowledge on just therapy, and it wasn't as like looked down upon or weird if you went to therapy, because therapy's good and my mom helps people and she's addressing issues that need to be changed and things like that.
Yeah, I think like looking back, and especially now when I'm like talking to people and they may not be trauma dumping, it's like when you can decipher versus like, do they just want someone to listen? Do they just need to like
Vent.
talk it out? Yeah. Or do they actually want somewhat of advice? Because there always can be like that therapist friend who has no knowledge, shouldn't be the
Background,
therapist
education.
friend. Right, when that really isn't what you need.
I also was going to say, you had a question just talking like how it was growing up with the specialist. I had a friend, I think in like the 5th or 6th grade, who started getting into drugs, started kind of getting into sex. And growing up in that more like religious background, I was able to talk about things and kind of process that more. So just understanding the whole mental health side to things. Yeah, just kind of, growing up with a specialist, I was able to, get more
not be so
knowledge on
scared of that topic when they
Yeah.
bring up these conversations, because
And I was kind of able to
Because
educate
mom
my
talks about
friends
this
or
every
neighbors.
night.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very non-judgmental space. It was just kind of like, hey, like this is what's going on. This is kind of what it is. This is what, how people's brain works. So I think that was kind of just interesting.
I think looking back at our childhood, I think mom did a lot of gentle parenting before gentle parenting became a vocabulary word. I think a lot of it was focused on, okay, what are your emotions and how can you process that? And I think each of us have very different personalities, and mom and dad were able to parent us according to what our individual needs were.
Personalities.
What are you talking about?
For example, I was always the peacemaker growing
I
up.
call bullshit.
There were a few times where you got frustrated being the peacemaker.
And you needed to throw down.
Then you would throw down.
I can't carry the family on my back.
True.
Daughter number 3
It's a shit story.
got her fingers broken by daughter number 2 over a pair of jeans.
I think that was after Kelly broke my glasses. So I just want to say that first.
I've changed. I went to therapy. I'm in therapy still.
Big humps.
I never
Big
graduated.
humps. Get through it. Still on the incline though.
Skiing down those slopes, baby.
I think something for me, especially when we were really little, I think we just kind of had built in a foundation of just being able to openly talk about hard topics. And so that made it like a safe space to be able to talk about things. And I think that's something that I've kind of carried with me throughout my life, is that with my husband, I'm able to just talk about whatever. It doesn't seem as daunting, I think, just being able to have that open sense of communication.
I do want to tell a story. When I was growing up, I loved slamming doors. And Jackie made this rule: if you slammed a door, you would have to open and close it 10 times gently. And that pissed me off. I never made it to 10, and I'd slam it, and then I'd just hear Jackie in the bathroom start over, and my door ended up getting taken off.
Multiple times. Not just once, multiple times.
It pissed me off.
You'd be somewhere in the house and you'd hear like, God.
She's the youngest. She's struggling. Parenting we kind of forgot about the parenting train. She's the youngest.
But I will say, if that was in another house with another parent, might have gone differently. In a bad way.
Yeah, true.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had a lot of autonomy growing up. Like, we didn't have a curfew.
I definitely had a curfew.
Did you?
Well, you're the first child.
It was like 11, so I mean, it wasn't like anything crazy.
But like, we didn't really get grounded, really.
I got grounded.
I got grounded, and then Mom figured out that I just liked being in my room, so she would start taking things out of my room. That is so I couldn't play by myself.
I got grounded once, and I screamed and cried on the top of the stairs for about 3 hours, and then Dad finally said, "You're ungrounded. Get the hell out of my house and go somewhere else." So I really know how to get away.
I think that goes to point out that I'm the peacemaker of the family. If I didn't have a curfew and I didn't get grounded.
I would say the curfews varied. Like, it depended on what you were doing, what time you came home. So,
Like you could have stayed out later.
If you had friends or not.
Somebody was an introvert versus an extrovert.
No, but there were times like maybe if you guys had a school dance, it's like, we'll be home, whenever.
3 a.m.,
like, okay,
baby.
well, probably not 3 a.m.
fell asleep on the floor.
Yeah. You would fall asleep at places that then we didn't know where this person lived and we couldn't get you home.
The cops would bring you home.
Oh, that did happen.
That did happen.
I was a wonderful child.
Aries child.
Grace is I've talked before on the podcast. Daughter number 4 is the feisty one that I've had to remind her growing up. Like, you don't have to go to every fight you're invited to. Sometimes you can just let them go. But she does like to get into a good fight.
And I win.
And I win.
I think it's been interesting to see the dynamic between our parents and their families and how they've taken the good things from their youth and put them into our family, and then things that they wanted to change and then change it in our family. I think it's also been interesting because a lot of the times growing up, like my friends had grandparents who are alive and we did not have grandparents who are alive. And I think just seeing the differences in how we talk, like that was another thing where, yeah, I could openly talk about that and be fine with it. And I was always that kid who, if we were watching like a PG movie and it's like parental advisory warning for sensitive children, I was that sensitive kid that couldn't watch the movie. And I just think that's interesting, that just seeing the different takes that you've done.
What about when you were learning the different shapes in elementary school? I thought sure you'd bring that one up.
This is a horrible story, and we could go to every single grade of elementary and just pull out multiple embarrassing stories. But this is the problem when you're in 3rd grade and your mom's a sex addiction therapist, and I'm learning. I was in Spanish immersion too, so I'm learning Spanish, I'm learning English, I'm learning math, I'm learning science, I'm learning all these things.
You got a speech impediment you're trying to get that hump over?
She's from Boston.
There was a day that they decided to like rotate through teachers, so like each teacher in the pod or whatever had a topic that each group would go to and learn math or science or whatever. And my little group of friends, or my little pod for that day, we went into Miss Tonioli's. Well, I don't know why I remember her name. She was not my like primary teacher, but I was in her class and we were learning shapes because that's what you learn in 3rd grade, I guess. And I was trying to be so cool and like so smart, and the shape was on the screen, and I think Miss Tonioli was like, "Kay, what shape is this? It has 6 sides." And I was like, "Oh, hell yeah. Watch this, baby. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to get called on." So I raised my hand so proud, and she calls on me, and without hesitation, I yelled, "A sexagon." And apparently that's not a shape, and it's actually a hexagon, but like I just had so many new words in my head and I didn't know what to do.
And then they called the counselor.
I was then kicked out because that's inappropriate and I needed to go to the principal's office, and I didn't mean to be inappropriate. I thought I was right. And now I'm like forever embarrassed. But you asked me what a six-sided shape is. Oh, I know. It's a hexagon. I will always know. 25 years old. I know my shapes.
Okay, should we look at next questions? Or did you have any more before we move on?
I kind of have, it's not necessarily a question. I was gonna say, I just thought it was interesting also growing up that you kind of taught us like a bunch of just, I guess, not necessarily rules, but just like rules to kind of follow. That's just like, if you get lost, kind of like, who do you go find? You go find a woman, or like you go find another mom.
3 buttons down.
Oh, let's not go there.
Oh. Or like, so like I had a situation one time where we kind of talked about it beforehand, but just like if I was ever uncomfortable in like a situation, me and my parents had like a code word that we would use. And I would send that code word and they would call me and be like, you need to come out now, just to like get me out of like an uncomfortable situation.
Grounded.
Yeah.
I didn't have a code word,
Oh, well,
but I couldn't have
I had a code
sleepovers.
word. I mean, I used it once, nothing crazy happened, but I was glad I had it. Like, I'm glad I had that out. Like, I was able to, kind of rely on that. And then that kind of picked up, I think, with my friend group, and they were like, oh, like that's something that like all parents should implement. So I think that was just kind of an interesting take that, nobody really around me also had or was doing.
The code word.
The code word. 65.
I think
That was our code word.
that's not even a word.
I had the old
That's all
flip
she had
phone.
to- yeah.
And so I'd go to hit OK and it would autocorrect to 65.
Oh.
So that was just the code word was 65 because I just would send that constantly.
I think this question kind of goes off of that. The question is, how do you think my work shaped your own approach to relationships and self-awareness? And I think from a very young age, we learn to be very self-aware, like whether it's at school or sporting events or, come whatever in public, wherever we were, just learn to be self-aware and like understand your surroundings and know kind of who's safe, who's a threat, things like that. And I think also going into relationships, like it kind of taught us like to really value your partner's like values and understand what's a red flag, what's a green flag, even like their family dynamics, like what's a good family dynamic, and nothing against your partner, whether they didn't come from a great upbringing or a good family dynamic, but like knowing for my future family or children or whatever, I don't know, but what I want is a family and what I want my children or spouse to value.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think growing up, we also had like our house was like a safe space. That's why we always kind of had like friends living with us. We kind of just had like people coming and going just because it was like a non-judgmental kind of safe space for people.
Daughter number 5. Raise
Daughter
your
number
hand.
5. She's been around for
5 years.
5
man.
years.
5 years. Moved back twice.
But yeah, I feel like that is something I've also kind of just admired and like I want to implement in like my own life. So yeah,
Yeah, I think the first time we had somebody move in, you didn't really know him either. He was like your
friend of a
friend's
friend.
sister's friend.
yeah.
And he needed a ride home from their house. And then he was like, I don't want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And so you wanted to go home. I think you took him to Starbucks or McDonald's or something, and he got some food. And then you just brought him home. And I think Dad and I woke up to a text saying like, hey, there's a boy asleep in the basement, just so you know. He's 15 or whatever he was, and his name's Aaron. And we're like, what? Like when we woke up the next morning, we're like, what? And then he lived with us for like a year.
I was like, he's chill.
Yeah.
He's cool.
You're like, I mean, I just met him, but he seems nice.
Yeah.
Needs a place to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, same kind of thing with daughter number 5. It was, hey, she's moving in.
Yeah.
I mean, you had known her for 3+ years by then, but
right.
It was very fast paced.
Yeah. I think I was working, I think that day, I think it was Labor Day, and I was working from home. And I'm hearing like some banging from my office at my home. And I kind of look through the door and I'm like, what's going on? And you're like, Lillian's moving in. And I'm like, okay, does Lillian's dad know? And you're like, yep. I'm like, okay.
Well, I think I had moved out like a week before. And then we just moved Lily right back in.
Just moved her right into your room.
Years in high school.
Mm-hmm.
COVID, so.
Yeah.
I think she would have an interesting perspective on coming into our family.
Yeah. I told her I talked to her
We
tomorrow.
can blame daughter number 3.
Yeah.
Way to go.
It's all on you.
Give it to me again.
Yeah.
I mean, it is on you. But I'm going to talk to her tomorrow and I'll add it to the show. So we talked a little bit about how it affected relationships. What about like just sexual health or consent? And then this question I sent, like, did my openness about these topics ever make you feel uncomfortable or comfortable compared to your peers? You kind of talked about that, but let's just talk about that question.
I think sex is an uncomfortable topic for younger kids. Like, it's a funny thing. And so I think, yeah, as a child, as an adult, I think I've come to appreciate it. I do think I'm still awkward about relationships and stuff. I don't really share my experiences in tough times, but I lost my train of thought.
I think what maybe some people would be fascinated about. Do you want to go?
I'll keep it.
I think what some people like may be fascinated about knowing that our mom's a therapist, they may think like, oh, your mom's a therapist, like your family must be so open and none of you ever need therapy and things like that. But like therapy kind of is a taboo thing. But I mean, if you talk to all of us, like all of us are actively in therapy, probably will be for a long time, and not in a bad way, but like just because our mom is a therapist doesn't mean that we don't also benefit from it
and go through struggles
and things like that. So I think that's just maybe something that our peers are like, oh, why would you need therapy? Your mom's a therapist, but you're a great therapist.
But my mom isn't my therapist.
My mom isn't my therapist. She's my mother.
Shout out Danielle.
She does have a great, I was talking to my daughter number 4 about this on my way home from the slopes. And we were just kind of talking about like, yes, our mom always wore her mom cap at home, like her hat, but she always, because of her knowledge and background and education, she always kind of had the therapy cap on in a good way, to where she could see different perspectives of like, if I'm asking her a question or asking for some advice, like she had a different perspective than maybe somebody's whose parent isn't a therapist or doesn't deal with like mental health and stuff like that. So I think she has always worn the mom cap, but she's able to look at our lives in a different way as well.
Yeah, with that, I will say she does do like a very good job of like separating the two. And like, it's a hard word for me. Compartmentalizing. Between work and home.
I think something that I have appreciated, but maybe when I was a kid, like rolled my eyes at, like, oh, mom again, is I think it was just implemented from a young age. Like we would have family meetings weekly, or if you needed to tattle on a sister or something, you could be like, I need to have a meeting with mom and dad because I'm really upset. And I think that's something that carried into like the sex ed talk. And then, you know, when you're in junior high and your friends are all talking about stuff, you'd be like, yeah, I'm like, my family's really open. We talk about stuff like that. And at the time you'd be like, oh yeah, we talked about it again last week. And she put up a PowerPoint during the family meeting this time, which is true. But now looking back, you're like, okay, yeah, I feel like we were all I feel like that was a comfortable subject. I know, like, I think there were people in the neighborhood we grew up in that had their oldest daughter who was getting married, who was maybe very religious,
very
but
unaware
they
of
asked
even the
mom to come have the sex ed talk with her and her fiance before they got married.
Because they never got the talk.
Because they never got the official talk. So I think
she was also uncomfortable having it with her mom, but her mom did want to sit in. And I think her mom's older than I was. So I was giving it to her mother and her fiance.
Never too late for a little bit of knowledge.
Put that on a t-shirt. Back to my train of thought that I lost. Bounces off of that. We did have a very like open and non-judgmental places at home for like emotions and sex talk, I think what we were talking about. But also growing up religiously was that like blurred lines of like, hush, hush, we don't talk about these things. If you have questions, you don't ask them. Those things. So it was kind of like this, like, oh, don't talk about it. Oh, but at home it is this like safe space.
And let me reteach you the truth and how it
and even like not even talking about sex, but let me like we teach you the right way or give you more details, and we don't have to be hush hush about this topic, and like this is just how the world works and things like that.
As I say, not to dump the religious trauma, but like you'd go to, your next class in church and they're like, oh, we don't talk about this. And I'm like, oh, I just had a full blown conversation
Let
with
me
both
teach
my
y'all.
parents about this. Like, let me educate y'all. But
I did get in trouble for asking if dinosaurs were in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Still no answer.
Chat GPT that shit.
Do you, I was just thinking about this because I've wondered as a parent, like, it wasn't my intention the way that Dad and I raised you guys for it to lead you out of the church, but do you feel like it did?
Oh, I was never in the church.
Yeah, I think you
I love to
say
pick that
too,
carpet
like,
off that wall.
My
Take my
mom will
shoes
say,
off.
like, Grace, growing up as a child, like, I didn't want to do this forever.
Yeah. I mean, some of your personalities, like Kelly, you were there to make people laugh.
I'm never a rule follower.
And to
I still don't
annoy
follow
the
rules.
teachers.
Yeah.
Or really, you wanted to make them laugh. I think you annoyed them, but you were trying to make them laugh.
But the stories they have now, they can share forever.
They do. I had
I'm
one
funny.
of your primary teachers in the LDS church, kids under 12 go to primary, and you had a male teacher. And every Sunday he'd come up and be like, okay, I got a new Kelly story to share with you. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. He's like, no, they're great stories. I think
sure
he was
he's
maybe the
still
only one
telling
who
them.
really loved the stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I grow on people.
I was gonna say, I think it might have been like it might be like a little different between like me and Sydney compared to Grace and Kelly kind of in church. I feel like my church experience was kind of just like I kind of went for like the social aspect. I was kind of in it. But then I left before both my parents, and so I think I kind of came to that conclusion myself, and I was just like, this doesn't like fit me. This isn't what I want. Like, I can't see myself going in what direction the church wants. So I'm just gonna, cut this off and do my own thing. And
I think as a young college student, away from your family is a very...
She was younger than that.
I was younger
She
than
was
that.
in high school.
I was 16.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, props to you.
Thank you. But I mean, I did have like the support of my parents who were still going, but they're just like, hey, like, do you want to go this
We're
week?
not gonna
and I'm
force
like,
you.
no, yeah. Like, no, I'm good. I'll see you later. And that was,
Bring me a snack if they bring snacks.
I'm like, still me some more of that sacrament bread.
No,
I just
That was
like
a joke.
I just like the water cups.
I was talking more like peanut butter bars.
Oh.
But okay. Sydney?
I think my experience differs from the three of you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I would classify myself as someone who's pretty devout in religion, but
You're
I would
more
also
of a rule follower.
I would also say, like, growing up, I had a lot of anxiety. I think that's just hereditary, and then it's just part of who I am, I think. And so I think this was an outlet that I could rely on, and if I focused on that, then I could make myself feel better that way. And I think growing up in the state we live in, all my friends were very active in their faith as well. So I think it was just another way to kind of be normalized in the area. And I think growing up, like, I felt like I was very progressive, like had a progressive mindset, socially and culturally, but then I was also very tied to this religious aspect. And at times I would be mad at my sisters who would make fun of me maybe for my choices. And I think sometimes that made me dig my heels in more, I think is something about my personality that I've noticed. When I went to college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my own life, knowing that I had the support of my parents either way, which I really appreciated. I think that is unique. Not that it shouldn't be. And so I think my faith journey was very different compared to these three. And when I ended up making the decision to step away from religion, I actually was very mad at my parents, probably for like a year. not that I expressed it because I'm a nice daughter, but I I felt really jilted by God. You can cut this out if that's weird.
No, you're good.
Okay. I felt jilted by God, I would say, and I felt really upset and mad at my parents for my upbringing.
For raising you in religion?
Yeah, just because I felt like, wow, my parents are college educated. And, I think any way you're raised, and I think any religion could do this, but I think there are certain aspects that can be great and bring you great values and great joy. And I think there are certain aspects that can be a negative thing that can maybe cause you more anxiety or cause you to feel detrimental. And I think that's any upbringing or any religion. But I was kind of mad because I felt like, why didn't you guys find this out before you had kids? Or why did you leave, this late in the game?
Probably made you have thoughts of like looking at like your friends' parents, like, well, why can those parents stay and why do my parents have to leave? Like, why do I have to be in this situation?
Yeah, I think I was more mad at the fact that I was like, and I know like you guys went through your own thing, and Dad particularly had phases of anger around the subject, but I personally felt mad at you guys.
I mean, I think it would have been different for you because I remember, like, one thing too, it was important to both Dad and I that you guys traveled outside of the United States in high school, and all of you did. But Sid, I remember you when you came back from Taiwan just saying, like, I didn't feel anxiety. And that was very different for you. And we were surprised because I think the night before you left, you came up and woke us up like in the middle of the night and you were like, I'm not going to go. And we were like, yes, you are.
We're
like
putting you on that plane.
The plane ticket's bought. Sid went to Taiwan. We're like, the plane ticket is bought.
You got 6 hours.
We have to be there in like 3 hours. Your bags are packed. You're going. And, I could understand where you were anxious. Like you're going to a place where the sounds aren't the same. The smells aren't the same. The people don't look like you do. Like everything was going to be so different. But then I thought it was very interesting that you didn't have the anxiety there that you do at home and, back in Utah. I remember wondering if that had to do with their religion. So it makes sense to me that, you had that anger, like what could be different had my parents left religion and not raised me in religion.
Not that I'm mad at you now.
No, I get that.
It's been a few years.
And to give the context to the listeners, when I was in 4th grade, I got invited to the super popular girls' house, and it was my in into being popular. And I made so many friends. We hung out, we talked, and at the end of the night, we were going to watch a movie, and I got invited to watch the movie, and some people had left. And the movie that we chose for this girl's birthday party in 4th grade was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
Love that movie.
Who watches that at a birthday party? I have to say, when I heard this later, I was like, what?
4th graders.
Anyways, that caused me a lot of anxiety afterwards. Like I remember Googling like Hitler conspiracy theories about him still being alive on the family desktop. And so I think because of that, like at the same time I had asthma attacks going on. So I think just that idea and reality of like, wow, this can happen in the world. And wow, like what's stopping this from happening now? I think that really amped up my anxiety as a 4th grader. And I would not sleep without my window open for a good 2 years. I would sleep outside sometimes just because I was like, oh my gosh, like what could go wrong? Where's the emergency exit anywhere I'm at?
It was just very scarier than inside.
It was that porch next to Grace's bedroom.
You used to sleep there?
I slept there occasionally, but it was very cold.
But then you also you would leave for school after everybody else, and you would lock every single door in the house.
Oh, yeah.
Including the garage door. And I got home before everybody else, and then I got locked out of the house. So I had to scale the pole onto the balcony.
I'd sometimes have to throw you up there.
No, you weren't there. Break into my window to get in. Sometimes I break through your window.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
I still locked my garage door. That is a pro safety tip.
After everyone's in the home.
Well,
We
I
lived
lock
in
it
the
when I leave to go to
suburbs of
work.
Utah. I don't think anything bad was happening there. Good.
Well, now we were
I
double
did
sure.
run home from my friend's house at like 8 p.m. when it was dark outside, who lived like 4 doors down because I was scared.
That's when you have a safe song and you sing it
Oh, what's
as
your
you're
safe song?
squinting. Wagon Wheel, Darius Rucker. I know it by
How does
heart.
that one go again?
No, we're not doing karaoke. We did that
When
the
do
other
you
night.
use this safe song?
When you're just scared running home from your friend's house when it's dark and the birds are flying and they're making noises and you just need to get home really, really fast. So
Was this a Jackie tactic or was this
No,
an
this
Emily
is Kelly
tactic?
made this up.
You just made this up?
I didn't make this up. I did this.
I know, where'd you learn this?
It's
I feel like it's a
Vicky,
girls' camp.
The
thing.
song just really touched her heart.
And she
Lord will
really
lead you
made
to
her feel
it. Lord will
safe.
lead you through it.
no, it's
Episode 600 will be a karaoke special.
Darius
Of
Rucker,
our
please
safe
hit us
songs.
up.
no, it's a great song.
I don't.
Makes
I
you
don't.
feel
It's a good song.
comforted. Good little karaoke jig.
Okay, back to the point. I was going to kind of bounce off Sydney saying, like, I understand that you were angry at mom and dad for not like setting that off, but like how you explained, like,
Just
why
kind of
me?
following.
Why does this
yeah.
have to, But like, I do have like great appreciation for my parents because that was their life for what, 30 plus years? That's what they knew and breathed and
Yeah, 40
Mm-hmm.
something years.
And
Mhm.
I got what, 12, 13? And I just
I mean,
Not
you really
even.
stopped believing at like 10.
right. So it's like, okay, how much do I actually believe and have and is ingrained in me? Sure, I've done some reflecting and like, okay, what are actually my values and what have I just been told? But doing that at 40 is just so much harder than doing it at 10.
Mm-hmm.
That.
I
But
think
then
in some
also-
ways, I mean, the way you guys are describing the way you grew up, I think you had some things to hold on to that Dad and I didn't really. And so we held on to the church a little bit longer. And you guys could feel like stepping away, you were going to be fine. And even Sid, when you left, I think you were the first one to actually resign, officially resign, and then the rest of us did. But I feel like you had something you trusted in yourself that led you to like give it up and step away. And I just think it took us a little bit longer to do that.
I mean, I think you always taught us, and us daughters never had the judgment around ex-Mormons and like, oh, the betrayal and whatever of that. So I think not believing in that and stepping away wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were friends with multiple people who were non-LDS.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I had thought of a question here, unless some of you want to say anything. Alex, were you going to say anything?
No, I was gonna say I feel like that neighborhood was also not the healthiest.
No.
So stepping away was
No.
also like a breath of fresh air where I
Once
was like,
we did
wow,
step
like
away,
yeah,
we didn't get hellos, waves,
Mhm.
walking in the neighborhood.
a lot of
We're
judgment was
exiled.
yeah, exactly.
And as a 12-year-old, that was weird
Mm-hmm.
because there was maybe one kid, two kids in my elementary school who were not Mormon.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, it was also kind of worth it at that point because I'm like,
I don't want any
yeah,
part of
you
that.
guys are not who I want to surround myself with. So
Can you pause that for a minute?
I don't know where the pause button is.
Just hit over there.
Oh, we're rolling.
One of you had said something and it made me think it's not like I forgot this, but I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this today. But when you guys first met my dad, I think, Alex, you would have been 7. And Grace, you were either a baby or I was about to have you. And so you probably don't remember that. I mean, you would remember maybe meeting my dad for the first time or maybe his funeral.
I remember his funeral.
Okay. And then Kelly, you would have been 3, Sydney 5, and Alex 7. And like for weeks after that, he came to my youngest sibling's wedding, and I introduced him to my kids. And I was like, hey, this is my dad. And it had never occurred to them, I think, that I had a dad, because they had never met him before. And he wasn't really a big part of our life. Part of that, I think he was avoiding paying child support until my youngest sibling was over 18. And then home from his LDS mission. And it was like weeks of you guys being like, remember that guy that's your dad? And then you'd ask a question like, did he know grandma? And I would be like, yeah, they were married at one point. Oh, well, did you live with him? Yeah, I lived with him. Did you live with him at grandma's house? Yeah, he lived at grandma's house. And then, a couple days go by and we're driving in the car and you're like, Mom, remember that guy that's your dad? And it was this thing that you guys, it had never occurred to you that I would have a dad. I mean, you were young enough too that it's not like you were teenagers or something. But then just to meet him, and I didn't know if he was coming to the wedding. So I didn't prep you guys or anything until he walked in and I introduced you guys. And I think one of the last questions, well, I remember the last question you guys had, but one of the questions was, I mean, this took like weeks of talking before you two figured out, and you were like, remember that guy that was your dad? And I'm like, yes. And you were like, is he our grandpa? And I was like, well, yeah, technically, but don't like what you hear about your friends' grandpas, he's not going to be like that. But then I think one of the last questions you guys asked was, Mom, remember that guy that was your dad? And I said, yeah. And you guys were saying, was he mean? And like, I don't remember what it was that you guys put together, but you guys asked about that. And then I know Alex and Sydney, you two particularly, when my mom passed away and my brother, who lived out of state, had flown home, him and his family, for the funeral, and they were staying at our house. And I wasn't sleeping well after she passed away, and he wasn't sleeping. And so he and I stayed up most nights and talked about our childhood, talked about our family. And I think it was after the funeral, they had left. I think Dad had left because they were going to move back to Utah. And so Dad had driven back with him or flown back with him, and they were going to pack up his house and move back here. And you two came to me and you were like, hey, just so you know, when you and Andy would stay up at night talking, we were around the corner on the stairs listening to what you guys talked about. And I think I had talked with you guys about age-appropriate things, like here's the family I grew up in. And you guys had questions, and so I would answer them. But when you guys told me that, because I knew Andy and I had talked very unfiltered. I didn't think anybody was listening. And so we talked in depth. We talked unfiltered. I had no idea my 2 kids were listening every night. And then you guys were like, we didn't know that.
Oh, right.
You didn't really tell new stories, or there wasn't a lot of new information, maybe new stories, but not new information. But I think you guys were reacting to how we talked and just how open and honest we were about it, whereas I had always filtered it to some degree when I talked with you guys about it. Anyway, anything you guys want to say about that process, or anything about my family, how we talked about that? I mean, Dad's family is a little bit different, and how we talk about that.
I think I was 14 when Grandma passed, but I think just hearing that story now, I think so. Like a year ago, I had a really good friend that passed, and I think just hearing that story, it's like, wow, I wish that I was able to have these kind of conversations, or me and my friends were able to have these conversations and just go into unfiltered and in depth about just the process of grief and death and things like that. When Instead, I feel like it's been very no talk. No, we're sad, but that's what happens. You move forward. No grief talk, nothing like that. So that's just interesting to hear. Like, it's kind of normal.
Kind of process it with,
Right.
Yeah.
I am an eavesdropper, and I will always be an eavesdropper.
Love being nosy.
I think for me, like our grandparent situation, I think was different than most of our friends.
Well, I was going to say Dad's dad had also passed before, like, I think I was maybe a year old. Yeah.
No, you were 6 months old when Dad's dad
Yeah.
passed.
So like we've never essentially had a grandpa.
We had great grandpa, but that was a more different relationship because he was older, great grandparent, not the primary grandfather role. I think for me, I don't know. I think it's been really interesting to see, like, even now, I don't call your dad grandpa. I don't, even when I talk about it, I just say, oh, my mom's dad, because I don't see him in that role. But I remember as a kid trying to process that. And I think, we had only met him a handful of times before his funeral. And I remember going to his funeral, which was the second funeral we'd been to. And I think I was 8 at his funeral. And I remember being like, oh, yeah, I should be sad, but I wasn't sad. And at the same time, I'm thinking, wow, my mom's dad is dead. I wonder how my mom is doing. But I don't think, I was 8. I wasn't able to elaborate on that. But I remember thinking, and grandma's there. And I even then we knew, oh yeah, he wasn't a nice guy. He's not a nice dad. That's why we don't know him. And then later on finding out, I think for me, it kind of became a thing of just more resilience that your whole family had to go through. And I think more respect for grandma, because I think grandma sometimes had to become a harder lady on the outside because she had to deal with a lot of stuff and she had to support 6 kids. And then she also had to deal with crazy kids at school. So I think
she was a school teacher.
Yeah, she had to be a tough lady. And I think that fed into the family dynamic a little bit. I don't know. I'm kind of ranting. Someone else.
I was gonna say a story that it's not an eavesdropping story, but I guess the story that kind of sticks out for me with your dad is just that cup of coffee story.
That was at his funeral.
Yeah, have you talked about? I don't know.
I've talked about it.
Yeah, just said like 3 things in life I love. Number 1's cup
4.
of coffee, or 4. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say it.
I can give you the order.
I was like 10.
It was a friend of his that he worked with. I had never met this person.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know who was going to talk at the funeral. I was surprised he had a friend. And so he said, anybody that knew Mike McAdams knew that he loved 4 things. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know what he loved. Like, I will learn something new about him. And he said, Mike loved, I think initially it was cars, which my dad was always a car salesman. I didn't know that he loved cars. I knew he sold cars. I didn't ever hear him really talk about different cars or anything like that. But okay, that was something I learned. And then he loved going to Wendover, which connected some pieces that I did not know about. I mean, I knew some things from my childhood, but I did not know that piece. So that was like a piece to the puzzle. And he talked about how every day before work, and my dad worked 6 days a week, he would go to Wendover before coming into work. And often he would go after work. So that clicked some things into place. And then he said, 3rd, he loved a good cup of coffee. And he talked about going to Village Inn, which was a restaurant here. I don't know if they're national, and getting coffee. And then number 4, he loved those 6 kids. So that was the order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was just that had kind of, I don't know, stuck with me because I'm like, oh, like that's kind of who Mike McAdam was. And then I think I saw him in the hospital when he had trachea. So I don't really know.
I think
if
he
that
was in
counts.
assisted living.
So he had that, and then that's really my only memory. But then overhearing Andy
At home.
At home, yeah. I know me and Sydney I think we went back and kind of processed it and was just going over a timeline like, hey, I didn't know this. Did you know this? This makes sense because of this. So I think we could kind of get something together. And then I think we came to you later and we're like, hey, we overheard this. I'm sorry, but can you kind of explain kind of, we already overheard this, but.
I think it helps us understand who you are and how you became who you are. And I think the same with Dad's family. Like, I love hearing stories about you guys growing up because it just
gives us a glimpse of like why you are the way you are and why you raised us probably very differently than how you were raised or why you value things that you value.
And I think something that like I don't remember, I'm sure, like, I don't remember you guys ever fighting in front of us growing up. I don't remember any arguments or scary fights or anything like that. And I remember even being at some friends' houses growing up and their parents would argue and nothing like crazy. I didn't see anything crazy, but I just remember seeing like, oh yeah, like my parents just don't argue in front of us, which I always
like,
appreciated.
they don't fight.
Yeah.
No.
And now hearing about their childhood and stuff, you're like, oh, there's a reason why.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like
that sticks with
and you
kids
could have
and
continued a cycle and decided to end it, which I appreciate.
Broke a lot of cycles and you know, have done better than what you were originally given. So I gave you major props for that.
I do think it's cool to see this cycle broken and then all of your siblings and their families, but then their children and our generation of this family coming out and being open about
mental health
struggles, mental health. Like everyone is very open to talking, and all these people are younger than me. So it's just cool to see what we came from and where we are now, a generation after.
I think it's also interesting your impact not only on our family, but just like your whole family and then the cousins. So like
your impact as a therapist on your entire family
and
our cousins
and because you'll take them out to lunch and then talk about stuff. So we have a cousin who's in school and is thinking about going into psychology and is possibly exploring that route. But I think that's because of you and what you've taught him, what he's learned. And yeah, I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I definitely went into therapy because of my family, which, I mean, most therapists, whether they know it or not, become therapists to work on something about their own story.
I'm adding something. I was gonna say I'm also going into mental health.
Yeah. You're wrapping up this year. You'll graduate with your MSW.
Yeah. Wrapping up school, going into my career. So yeah, I credit a lot of that to you. I credit a lot of what I've learned. And I guess just my basis and my background is based on what I have learned from you and using that in school, with friends, at work. I've kind of every kind of job I've had, I've kind of been coined as the work therapist. So I just think that's crazy. Sorry, I lost my train of thought, but
yeah.
I think this conversation can kind of lead into one of the questions here. The question is, if you could give advice to other kids with parents in similar fields, what would it be? I just picture all of us as an elementary age. If I were to give advice to a child in third grade or something like that, and their parent is a therapist or works in mental health and counseling and sex addiction and stuff like that, I think the biggest advice I would give them is don't be afraid to like truly know and say what your parent does for work, and like what they do is actually very knowledgeable and helpful and like needed in this world and can be life-changing to their clients. And you shouldn't be ashamed, even if it has the word sex in it. You shouldn't be ashamed to know what they do, and like, just things like that. Like I don't think we were necessarily ashamed, but we were kind of taught
it's like taboo topic.
It's very
But
taboo.
there's that like
and
stereotypical, I know all of us have watched it, but the TV show Sex Education, great show. But the mom is a sex therapist, and she is very like pro sex, do it the right way, have fun, and like murals on the wall of flowers that look like vulvas. Not Jackie Pack. Jackie Pack, addiction is a good part in there. That's the like stigmatized.
Right, I think going off
thing
that, like
that,
anytime
like-
someone asks what my mom does for work is
That's what they picture.
Oh, that's
I-
the
you know?
go-to where people
I
think
say
of.
sex addiction therapist and
You have to
specializes
enunciate
in
the addiction.
other addictions and marriage and family counseling and betrayal trauma and things like that, right? Like she's not just talking about how to have good sex.
Yeah.
I mean, I do talk about that too.
Yes, but just not that.
I mean, I do have an embarrassing story. I remember when I don't know how old I was. I want to say elementary school. I walked into your bedroom, and on your nightstand was a pink vibrator in the box, in the packaging for work. But it sat there for months on
Probably
your
'cause she
nightstand.
forgot to take
and
it to
I'm like
work.
8 years old. I'm like, what is that?
Every time you walk in, it's right there.
it's
It's
bright
pink.
in the packaging, but still.
Yeah, you guys, I learned at some point if it's a book, don't open it because you didn't know what the title was going to be, but it was probably work related.
I have some really good selfies with some hilarious book titles.
You do.
Yeah,
I've seen some pictures that
I
I've
think
seen.
they're very funny. My friends get a good laugh.
Okay, any last thoughts before we wrap up? I appreciate you guys doing this.
Do you want to give us a grade on how we did
Oh, you
for the
all,
viewers?
Oh.
you all get A's.
Are we invited back?
Yeah, you can come back.
Do we want to end on advice? Kelly did hers.
Sure.
Daughter number 3 did hers. Daughter number 4, you're up.
Yeah, I think, I'm the youngest. I'm 21. I think going into my therapy and like my journey, I've had a lot of appreciation or like understanding and knowledge of my mom and why she does what she does and who she is and her morals and values versus her education and her knowledge and her background and her story and how that plays into my childhood and how she raised us. I think that has become more conscious to me going through my own work and story.
Yeah, I think even with that, when I first started therapy, I feel like, so one thing that I feel like all of us probably are very good at, just because we grew up with a mom as a therapist, is when we do have a thought, we're very good at like seeing the pros and cons to that thought. Or if we have an idea or we're going through like a crisis kind of and deciphering like whether I do this or that, I feel like when I first started therapy, like, I brought issues or just things about my life to my therapist, but before she could get a word in, I already had bullet points of like, here's a pro to this, here's a con to this, here's all these things. And it's like, just growing up, you just allowed us to, one, think outside the box, but
Work through
allowed
it.
us to work through things and gave us multiple insights and perspectives on life. And there's not just one pathway, there's not just one journey. And you allowed us to be who we want to be, and you were going to accept us for whatever we chose to do or be who we wanted to be. Maybe not if we went to prison, but so far so good. Daughter number 1.
Oh, daughter number 2?
So going back to advice, right? That's what we're on.
I think so.
I think being able to lean into your parent as a parent, and then also being able to keep that open line of communication would be my recommendation, because you're going to use your mom, your dad, whoever, as a lifeline, as someone you're going to call and ask random
Not just
questions
18 years
to.
old. We all live at home almost. Most of us.
For those of you that live at home,
Peasants.
when you first move out and then you're like, wow, I don't know where to find this kind of ingredient in the grocery store. Let me just call mom and dad really quick and they can tell me what aisle I need to go to. Or I don't know. I mean, when you lived out of the house, you probably called them like once a week.
Yeah,
to just
be like,
randomly chat.
What's this recipe?
Yeah.
Like, what are you guys up to?
I still do that. Mm-hmm. Anyways, cut that out in post.
You're good.
It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you kind of stole mine. I was going to say being open, keeping that open line of communication. I think it's essential for any healthy relationship. Also taking it easy on each other. Like your first time being a parent, it's my first time, either experiencing life and doing things. I was gonna say, it brings me back to the thought of like, just with religion, you went a certain direction. I went in the direction of like, oh yeah, our parents went through this. They spent 30, 40 years in this. Let's give them a break. Let's give them a sec to process that, because that's a lot. So yeah, just kind of acceptance, open line of communication. I think that's my advice.
I would say one of the things that I think too, there's been several times over my career. I remember being maybe at one of your soccer games or your soccer games. I don't remember. And the previous soccer game, I had been out of town for work. And I remember one of the parents came to me and said, why do therapists travel for work? Like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I go to trainings or I do different things out of state. And I don't remember particularly at that time why I had traveled. But I know a lot of therapists who have not made that part of their career. And I remember, you guys probably don't remember the name of it, but two of my CSAT colleagues, Dr. Patrick Carnes was going to do a one-time, let's do a work the 12 principles book that he had written. And it was going to be a 3-year process. And every quarter for 3 years, we would go down to Arizona and we'd fly in Friday and do Friday, Saturday, come home Sunday. Sometimes I would go down Thursday. And initially when they texted me and were like, hey, we're going to do this, we think you should totally do it too. We want you to do it with us. And my first thought was, oh, I can't do that. I mean, that's, some of my own issues. But I was talking to Dad about it and he was like, why can't you do it? And I was like, well, the kids, and it's a 3-year commitment and I'd have to go quarterly. And he was like, yeah, but why can't you do it? And then we talked with you guys and I was explaining it to you guys and you guys were like, you should totally do it. And, if it was up to me, I probably would have passed on that. And I was really grateful that I did not, even though it meant for 3 years, I didn't miss one of them. I was there for 3 years every quarter. And, I really appreciated that, like Dad and the 4 of you were like, you should totally do it. Like, why wouldn't you do that? And so I feel like you guys also were supportive of my career, encouraging me to grow and, expand in ways that I probably would have denied myself, or I would have been like, oh, I can't do that. I shouldn't travel for work. I don't need to travel for work. And instead, I did have those opportunities to go to trainings that didn't just happen to come to Utah or to Salt Lake. I could go to them and get some of those better quality trainings, pursue what I wanted to pursue. And I think a lot of that had to do with knowing that you guys supported me in my career and that, Dad supported me in my career. And he could also, as a parent, step in and take care of you guys, let you guys eat in front of the TV, which I never let you guys do that. Yes, he would cook sloppy joes because I refuse to eat a sloppy joe. And so I won't cook them.
Thank you.
But he would step in and parent you guys. And so I knew I could go.
Yeah, leave. I think with that, probably the biggest reason to why we were never hesitant to be like, yeah, go to this training, go to this conference, is I think just from a very young age, witnessing you working full time and being in a career and an important career and always giving to that. I think you just engraved in us that we should grow up to have a career. We should grow up to get a higher education and be smart and do something for ourselves and want something and just like be happy in a career. And I think for, at least for me, I grew up never thinking that I would never not go to college or just have a career and stop growing and learning. I just kind of knew from a very young age, I ain't gonna stop learning till I die, baby.
And I do want to acknowledge, in a good way, you are always evolving and changing and bringing different concepts. That I would say you're a very different mother than you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. I think you're always that kind of open person, always evolving, changing, and growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. And I think that's something I learned from my mom. She was an educator and she valued education, but she also just valued learning. And I think in many ways, like, my interests are different than her interests, but I did learn to value learning from her.
I think being able to watch your and dad's relationship has been great, because I think, like you guys were talking about, like a lot of times in a relationship, you're not going to be each giving 100%, right? Like someone may be doing 190%, someone has to do the other 10, or maybe start over. It's not always 50-50. Sometimes it's 80-20. Sometimes you have to step in more for your partner, but okay, when it's my turn, maybe you have to step in more. And I think that just shows a good partnership. And I think it also shows we know you and dad support each other. And I think for me, like, going to get my education was great, but I know you're very supportive of our choices, and whether that's to be a stay-at-home parent or if Aaron wanted to be a stay-at-home dad and I worked, I think we would be able to make that work, and I don't think you guys would feel any different about either of us. And I think that's something that I value, just knowing whatever we want to do, you'll be supportive of it.
Yeah. Okay, any last thoughts? Are we wrapping up?
Yeah, I think I'm just very proud and grateful and privileged that you're my mom.
Thank you.
And you're not just our mom, you're multiple children.
You're everybody's mom.
You're everybody's mom.
I do.
And dad is everybody's dad.
Yeah.
Dad has stepped and played a role as like father influence for multiple of our friends or boyfriends or whatever
Jeff's
it
a
is.
legend. Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to hear Lily's point of view coming in and having you kind of be that mother role too. But then I know she's also not used you, but like have asked you for therapist advice, and she like picks your brain, and also her boyfriend is very interested in psychology, and I think your mind is fascinating, and you're the girl, you're the lady. Someone needs therapy, I know the girl.
You need a referral? Contacts. We got you.
Yeah. She knows everybody.
All right. Well, I will do my typical ending when I wrap with Lillian tomorrow when I record with her. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for putting some thought into the questions and the answers and being nice to me, because you guys can joke about me and you can make fun of me. Wrap it there. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes, thank you for sharing.
Your mom.
Okay, we are back. I had mentioned that Lillian, daughter number 5, was not able to be with us last time because daughter number 3 went skiing and was late getting home. And so we have reassembled and we're back with daughter number 5 with Lillian. And so we're going to do a shorter clip, but getting her perspective and making her part of the conversation. So glad to have you here, Lillian. Thanks for making it.
Of course, glad to be here.
Okay, so I was just, before we hit record, I was telling you, like, we don't have to do all the questions, but any thoughts that you had? Is there one particularly that you wanted to start with? Make sure the mic's close to you.
Okay. I think not one particularly. I had a few that I could talk on. I guess the one that was something about your view or like perspective on relationships and everything. That for me, I think had changed a lot, because prior to, you and Jeff, I was never witnessing healthy relationships very much. And so I think hearing your stories from just everything you do, I've gained a better sense of awareness of the relationships around me, the people I know, and the relationships and dynamics. And so going into relationships myself, I was very, very kind of like guarded, like watch out for this, watch out for this, watch out for this. And so personally, with Charlie, when I first started going out with him, I was like, oh my God, there's that taboo or that common misconception, I guess, with
Of
this. Like, I told my cousin, I was like, oh, there's this boy at work. And she was just like, that's like risky, da 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 da.
to date somebody from work?
To date somebody in recovery.
Okay, yeah.
And then, so I came home and I was like, oh my, how am I going to tell everybody he's in recovery? And I was spiraling over it. I was in the bathroom telling Grace and Kelly, you guys can't tell anybody this yet. And then right then and there, it clicked into my brain. I was like, oh, Jackie works with people in recovery and addicts every single day. She's going to be the last one to judge. So it kind of just like helped me find a new perspective there.
And Charlie has a pretty, it seems to me, I mean, I'm on the outside. I don't ask him. I'm not his therapist.
Right.
I don't ask him details about his recovery. But what he shared, what you talk about, he seems to have a pretty solid recovery program going.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think for somebody who is in recovery, maybe you don't know for certain, but you know they've navigated issues with substances, they've navigated issues with addiction, versus somebody who's never really had to navigate that, especially at your young age. Does that eventually in 10 years manifest as addiction? Is this developing addiction? That's not the case with Charlie, right? He's had to look at his own addiction. He's had to get into recovery and build a solid enough recovery program to make his life stable. I know he wants to go into social work or something like that, becoming a therapist himself. He's going to have enough stability to be able to do that work. And from what I can tell and what he shared, he seems to have that.
Right. Yeah. And I think having you as an influence, I think that was kind of part of my thought process was if I hadn't had you, I would just have this one, like he's in recovery. But with you, I had this broader perspective of like, okay, but he is very secure and stable in his recovery. I think this is safe to move forward with.
Yeah. I think you told me months later how worried you were about telling me that he was in addiction and in addiction recovery. And I think I just laughed. That didn't make sense to me. Why would you be afraid to tell me that?
And after no, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. But I get it. Not everybody understands somebody who's in recovery from addiction and what goes into building a recovery program that sustains you in long-term sobriety.
Right.
Yeah.
And then some other things just from like having you as an influence. The question about like, were you comfortable, uncomfortable? Do you wish I was like more or less open about like conversations around sex? When I first moved in, like at the dinner table, I was like, oh, this is crazy.
These people are way too open.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable right now. Like that is such a taboo topic. Like that's crazy. But like as like I got more comfortable and I was like, no, this is actually like quite the opposite. This is awesome. I'm really appreciative of these conversations. Like this is normal. This should be normal. I think it's weird if you're not like comfortable having those conversations. There were so many.
Or while you're thinking about it, I will just say, I think too, just to clarify, it's not like I get into the details of my kid's sex life.
No.
They don't want to talk to me about that. And I don't know that I really want to talk about that with them. But we have conversations about sex in general.
We have conversations about relationships, more broad at this point. When my kids were younger, we did have specific conversations about sex because they were learning and they were young. And I feel like we just had different conversations at different ages around sex. Initially, I remember my brother asking me once, I think he was at our house, and maybe there was a news story on the TV talking about sexual abuse. And one of you guys commented and he was like, your kids know what sexual abuse is? And I was like, yes, that's how I keep them safe. That's how I said a lot of kids who get sexually abused don't have the language to tell their parents what is happening to them. And so my kids have that language, and I check in with them. I talk to them about whether they have secrets that they need to tell mom. And so, yeah, they know about sexual abuse. And he was like, well, do they know what sex is? And I was like, well, no, that'll be in a couple of years. We'll have those conversations. But right now at this age, they need to understand what sex abuse is. And so it was kind of just gradually they got more and more information about sex and what it was. I mean, we did have to get into the specifics, as they said in the last recording, in restaurants. Usually we were at restaurants. But it wasn't like a one-time conversation where we talked about the specifics of what sex actually is. And so we could have multiple conversations about it. And so that's when I feel like when you guys were in relationships that were sexual, I don't need to know about that. I've already covered that information with you guys. You already knew what you needed to know. And so I don't need the details now.
Right. I use.
Mm-hmm.
I think really just like any conversation at the table having to do with anything under that umbrella was new to me. And I think I've realized that's like preventative in a way. Those conversations are preventative of sexual abuse. But just even things like playing Pictionary. When Pictionary gets a bit wild and everybody's like still laughing, it's not uncomfortable, it's funny. Yeah, but like it's funny, and that's like that was completely new to me, and I was like, but this is and should be normal. Yeah, and I think I've had conversations with Alex about how that was new to me, and I was like, this is eye-opening. I think that should be normalized because I think that creates, I would say, healthier living, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just making it not taboo. Yeah. So we can talk about it.
Right. And again, to just prevent risky situations.
Yeah. I remember one time, it was the first time Charlie slept at our house. We'll get to you, Kelly. For this recording, I only have 2 mics. I had borrowed 3 other ones for the one before. So you came to me and said, hey, Jackie, and Jeff was out of town. And so you just said, hey, are you okay if Charlie sleeps over tonight? And I kind of sat there for a minute and I'm thinking, and then I was like, I really can't think of a reason why not. So yeah, I'm good with that. Yeah, I can't come up with a reason why not. And I know for some parents that makes them extremely uncomfortable. The thought of their adult children or their older teen children sleeping in the same bed with a romantic partner or sexual partner. And it's just never, I was raised in religion. I knew women who would never have allowed that. And even when I was in religion, I was always like, I don't know, like why I would be so concerned about that. I don't really feel disrespected by it. I know that people are sexual. I just can't think of a reason why this feels distressing to me.
Yeah. I think I also asked that question as just, are you okay? Like, this is a house full of women. Mm-hmm. Are you okay? Like, if I bring another person to spend the night? Yeah. But again, like you said, like some parents aren't okay with that and they're deeply disturbed. And I think that's, again, like you've given me this broader perspective And I'm like, that's a them problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't understand why parents would be offended about their children. Like all of their adult children at some point are going to be sexual.
Right.
I don't understand why that's so offensive. Yeah. But I don't find sexual things offensive. I don't find sex offensive.
No. And that was very new. Like coming in, the conversations we'd have. Yeah. Kelly, did you have something to say?
Well, I just had a question that just popped in my head when you were talking about when we were young and like teaching about sexual abuse or something. I want to know if when you were having kids, and I guess on the fourth one, you knew they were all girls.
Mm-hmm.
Did that scare you more than if they were boys? Yeah, sure.
Yes, it did. In my head, and I now know that this isn't really accurate, but in my belief system at that time, and I became a therapist at 25, so I didn't have any kids at the point where I became a therapist. But in my mind, girls were more at risk of being sexually abused, of being sexually harassed, of being sexually assaulted. All of those things, girls were at a higher risk. And then I had my own issues around femaleness from my family of origin, or I don't know, the religion I grew up in for sure. And so I think it scared me to parent 4 girls and to have that responsibility. And Dad and I had a lot of conversations about that, because I don't think it's just moms of girls that have that responsibility. I think dad girls, whether you have all girls or whether you just have 1 or 2 girls and some sons, I think there's some responsibility that comes to being a dad, a girl dad, as well as being a girl mom. And, I now know, at the time I knew the statistics were 1 in 3. And I remember I was a new therapist and I had 2 girls when I got my full licensure. So I'd finished supervision. I'd been a therapist for 2 years. It takes about that time to become fully licensed. And I was talking to my supervisor at the time, and I was saying, the stats are that 1 in 3 females are sexually abused, and I have 2. And what if I have another child and it's a girl? Which one of them am I going to let be sexually abused? And he looked at me. He was a very good supervisor, and he was like, Jackie, you realize in some families, all of the daughters are sexually abused, and in some families, none of the daughters are sexually abused, right? It's not like 1 in every family. And I was like, right. I did not realize that, because I think of the fear that I had about being a girl mom. And so I was like, okay, yeah, none of my kids are going to be that statistic. Now I realize, and at the time it was 1 in 7 boys are sexually abused. Now they speculate, boys are less likely to report it, or even to have it recognized. Like if they're that tween teen age and it's an older female, sometimes we have a harder time seeing that as sexual abuse, even though it definitely is. And so because of the underreporting, I think people who know the statistics and work in the field would say they're probably the same. But the numbers we have are like 1 in 6, 1 in 7 boys, 1 in 3 girls. But more than likely, they're equal.
Very nice. I was just having this conversation with a coworker. I work at a children's hospital, and I don't know, it was late at night. We were just waiting for our shift to be over. But I was just like, maybe I'm kind of shocked how we don't see as many children coming through the ED who are sexually abused or raped or whatever it is. And I don't know why I said that, because I know better than that, but I just said that, and my coworker, she's 42 maybe,
She was like, well, yeah, because it's not reported. And also,
well, and there's not
don't
as
know every kid. Like, although we do
Yeah.
like a screening of child abuse and sexual abuse and stuff, it's not reported or whatever. And
it's usually more hidden. People can keep it hidden, right? You would see them if they also had physical abuse going on and they're assessing that child and doing some exams, then they might discover the sexual abuse. But sexual abuse can be hidden. It's not like physical abuse.
right. But yeah, it just made me think of like, oh, you're right. Because then she went into her her family details, and it seemed like out of all her siblings, besides her, all of them have as a child been sexually abused, boy and girl. So then I was like, oh yeah, that was a dumb question because I know better than that. My mom's a sex addiction therapist.
But sometimes we ask those questions out loud because it pops into our head. And then as we're talking it out, we're like, oh, yeah, right. I get that.
Yeah. And that was kind of the scenario.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me look at other questions and see if there's, or do you have your list? Okay.
I feel like I always knew I was anti-porn, and then but I was just like, that's just because I just know that. And then having you talk about it regularly, I started to understand and also be able to build my own opinions about it. Like, this creates unsafe spaces for women. This is a huge problem in society. But peers are so casual about it, or I knew people who were so casual about it and open about it, and I was like, that's kind of a problem, and they were like, I remember one time being at one of my jobs and my coworker was like, fuck Utah, just Utah's so lame, all the very judgmental people, we need to have more conversations about sex. And they were during these topics they were like, sex, porn, masturbate. And I was just like, oh my God, I don't want to know these things about you, first of all, but also I don't think cheering for porn is good thing.
Right. I think sometimes we'll get very dualistic. Like if the Utah culture, because of the dominant religion here, is very anti-pornography, doesn't really teach healthy sexuality, then people will go to the opposite extreme and be like, it's no problem. There can't be a problem with it. The only problem is this religious stigma. And that's too far of a correction. And nothing is that black or white. Nothing is that simplistic where it's either all true or all untrue, or it's all this way or the opposite is the way. It's complex. And you have to be able to have those complex conversations. And I don't know that a lot of people are able to, regardless of what side they're on, whether they're pro, this is how sex should be taught, and porn and all of this conversation should be open, or overly rigid about it. Neither of those really capture the nuance and the complexity.
Yeah, no, I remember in middle school, they did an assembly that was porn kills love. And the whole room was so you have the nasty teenage boys. But it was just a very uncomfortable situation. And I don't think it was ever, except for one person maybe, who talked about, I was never in spaces where it was talked about ever again until I was around you, and she would discuss it openly. And it did give me more understanding of, oh, I didn't realize that also falls under an addiction category. And so kind of with peers, when they were speaking about that there at work, and this kind of trickles into other substance abuse issues with my peers, it helped me to realize your casual porn or your casual substance use that's daily is not casual or healthy.
Right.
beforehand, I'd be like, yeah, they do that every single day and whatever their life. And then after a while, I started to realize, no, I don't think that's healthy or normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That also reminds me, I was at somebody's house one time and their roommate, we walk in and I was like, oh, do I hear somebody watching porn? And so I thought like I heard a roommate watching something because I'm just going to say it was at Charlie's house and Charlie was like, I'm not going to say the roommate's name. He was like, dude, Lillian thinks you're watching porn in there. Like, what are you doing? And the roommate goes, oh my God, Utahns. Like, and I was just so like, you need to have a conversation
you are watching porn?
with Jackie. You need to have a conversation with Jackie because, and I kind of did like go on until I was like, it's not worth it, whatever. But I was like, no, it's not just a Utah issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Utah being a sterile state or whatever. No, there are much larger issues stemming from that whole industry.
Yeah.
Not to mention other states' bans on porn as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've worked with clients who exit Mormonism and start drinking, start using substances, and let's say they're in their 40s and they're describing it to me, and I'm like, okay, you're drinking like a fraternity boy, but you have this career. You've worked hard to advance in your career, and the way that you're drinking is going to compromise a lot of things in your life because you're 40 something years old, right? And they'll talk about, so for viewers who aren't that familiar with Mormonism, Mormonism doesn't accept, or they don't believe any consumption of any alcohol or any substances is accepted in the religion. And, you know, you have at least yearly interviews, if not more often, where you're specifically asked these questions if you have done that. And so they will have that mindset like, well, it's just Mormonism that says that it's bad. And I'm like, no, people who have never been Mormons can be addicts. And the way that you're drinking, you're going to get there really quickly, right? And then they get a DUI and they're surprised that they got a DUI. And for some of them, they did lose their job. It did compromise their career. And one of them, he didn't lose his job, but he lost his driver's license. And his parents were having to drive him to work every day and pick him up. His late 60-year-old parents were having to drive him to work, pick him up at the end of the day because his wife worked, and that's how he could get a ride.
Yeah. I just, oh my gosh. I think with Mormonism portraying that you don't do any of that. All of that is bad. Don't touch it at all. And then the people going to the other extreme, it's like, no, I think saying no completely to substances and being like, that's so awful, don't do that, is going to steer people to like, that's how you create those unhealthy relationships with those things. And I think I've learned more from you about there can be, if you have boundaries for yourself, there can be healthy amounts for some people,
right?
Not for everybody. But you can't be extreme on either end.
Well, and I would add, if you're using substances to try to deal with the emotions or the dysregulation, we probably have, at least at the basic level, some problematic use. And again, if you can't talk about emotions, if you don't understand yourself, why the emotions are there, why you get dysregulated, then that can be problematic. And it's going to, in some ways, handicap you as a human being because you're relying on something external to you to try to manage or regulate things that are coming up internal in you that you're not addressing, you're not facing, you're not talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from my own childhood, I would come at these topics with such a judgmental and angry perspective. And I think having your perspective has helped me be like, no, these people just not excusing their certain actions from anybody by any means, but there's a different perspective. Don't just come at it from a judgmental, harsh way. There are things that need to be worked on. There are deeper rooted issues to work on. And that's where I also started to believe, everybody could benefit from therapy. You kind of had a question that was like your new like perspective or like your take on like mental health and seeking therapy. And I was kind of always like an advocate for mental health, or like at least I was like a firm believer. But I think I started to like integrate this new like no, more people, probably more people, like most of the people you know should be going to therapy. And
I think a lot of people would benefit from being able to talk about things and then get another perspective and from somebody who's trained and has some expertise in what you're seeing them for and can help navigate, your beliefs or your understanding or, your view of yourself and what you're doing and what your goals and what your dreams are.
Yeah, I think kind of understanding some of these issues aren't permanent and just like that's a problem that you're going to have to deal with forever. It's like, oh no, there's a professional who probably has solid skills that'll help you. That's not something that everybody has to live with forever.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to hear like your childhood perspective, because we grew up in like a pretty suburban, closed off area, even though like I will say like we were pretty religious and we had that like judgmental point of view. But I think I always separated myself from that because of my mom. But you didn't have that. I mean, I think you still had that influence because we're in Utah, but you weren't ever Mormon. I know one side of your family is pretty religious, but I want to know your perspective on stereotypical Mormon views on addicts and people that are struggling versus your view, because I know I had a more open view, but I never saw it at face value or had to deal with that as a child.
I remember moving to the last elementary school I went to. It was the third one. And the first day I said OMG on the bus. I can't remember if I said OMG or oh my God. But this one girl, I won't name her name, but she said, what did you just say? And I said, OMG. And she was like, OM what? And I was like, oh my God. And she was like, did you just say the G word? I was like, I did. And she was like, you're the only non-Mormon in the grade, you know? And I was like, thank you. And so I walked home and I eventually kind of somehow, I don't remember if I became her friend or not, but I remember being like, oh, not that I ever really had friends over at my house, but I was like, I can't ever have friends over at my house. They won't like me because my dad smokes cigarettes. And so I never judged people. Okay, that's probably a lie because I did have the Utah influence. Of course, just some anger. So I did sometimes judge people for those same things, but I wasn't there an awful person. I kind of experienced it from like, this is going to affect if I'm able to have friends or not, based on not even my own actions. Yeah. But I still didn't agree with it. I knew from a young age, I was like, I don't want to be a part of that. But I'm not going to be like, the girls in elementary school were rude about that stuff. And I was probably silently a bit rude. Like I remember if I was like walking around on a street and somebody was smoking a cigarette, I was like, ugh, like covering my face purposely and like.
Even though your dad in your home smoked cigarettes.
Yeah, and I would not do that to him.
Right.
No, but
just learned judgment, right?
Yeah. So, but then I think as I grew up, like probably middle school, I stopped caring. I was like, what does it matter? Like, as long as they're not like a bad person, like harming others, it should not really matter that much as long. And then I grew up again and was like, use it in moderation. I'm not going to judge you. If it's unhealthy, I'll be concerned. Yeah. But I think on the other side of that, rather than addiction, but with mental health, I think I remember growing up and people kind of judging that and always being like tiptoeing around that. I was like, oh, if they know that like your family has mental health issues, they're going to ostracize you. And I kind of realized like, oh no, people aren't ostracizing, or at least people shouldn't be ostracizing you for like health. Like that's a real concern in the world that should be like more openly talked about.
That made me think, I think maybe Kelly, it was you, but I could be wrong, is you were entering adulthood. So maybe you were, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, something like that. And you said, Mom, why were we always friends with the Black family, the lesbian couple, the mixed race couple, the like? Well, I don't think you were questioning it, but you were just like, I don't think other people in our neighborhoods were friends with them. And I said, yeah, I think we ended up being friends with people who were different than us simply because we didn't care. I didn't care. I would just talk to them. They were people because that's how I believed. And so that's how you guys also believed and saw other people. And it was just, something that wasn't that big of a deal in our family. I think I did value, and Dad as well, valued not having judgment for people different. I said this in the last recording. It was important to both Dad and I that all of you traveled outside of the country before graduating high school. And part of that was I just wanted you to see something different than we were, something different than how we lived in Utah, how we lived in the United States, and to not be afraid of that and to just incorporate that into your experience and your growth and your learning. But I think also that had also happened previously with people who were in our neighborhoods, who lived next door to us, that we were just friends with them and talked to them and made them like we'd invite them for dinner, or they'd invite us for dinner. It just was not that big of a deal. But you guys also knew that to other families, it was.
I think I remember like wanting to fit in with the Mormons so bad and wanting so bad to be Mormon. And like, now I'm like very glad that that's not the case. But I think maybe that's where some of that judgment for like people, or like kind of anger about, oh, my dad smokes cigarettes, was because my peers were judging him. Mm-hmm. So it's like, even though I saw that other perspective, it was almost like growing up and it would still make.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an important need for kids growing up, is to belong, to be accepted. And so when you are not, because of things that are out of your control, that can be really hard on kids. And of course they want to be accepted, even if later on down the road, they're like, I actually don't really care about that. Or I'm glad I didn't grow up with those religious messages. It's just during those ages, a sense of belonging is so important. I mean, a sense of belonging is always important, but those are some really pivotal years.
Something to say. Okay, I think I'll touch on the topic of, do you think like your work has ever boundaries? I don't think so. I think that when I have questions or like I'm like very curious, I'll go out and about, into the world and see and hear stuff, and I'll come and ask Jackie like, "Oh, what do you think about this?" Like I was a part of a situation that I was, kind of going around to everybody in the house like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I was like, I know who I need to go to get both kind of like a professional and educated answer as well as a conversational, like, not like a gossipy moment, but like just a regular conversation about what's going on. And I can go to Jackie about those things and get that knowledgeable perspective. And I feel like I like learn something from Jackie weekly. Maybe not recently because like, I feel like we've not had those conversations in a while where we're like at the kitchen counter, up until like 10:30 p.m.
Right.
But I feel like most of the time here, I learn something from Jackie weekly that I can like take with me and kind of like, use to observe just day-to-day life, like other people's family dynamics, like coworkers or just other people's relationships, or like, again, circling back to the like realizing that like peers using substances every day, oh, that's not healthy, just stuff like that.
I mean, I think similar with my kids growing up, when you guys would have issues with friends, we'd have more age appropriate discussions. But I think there were a lot of times where I would say, sometimes when this happens, it's actually because the other person feels insecure about them, or sometimes this happens because of this, or trying to make it not so personal to you guys, but help you understand. I mean, yes, I would validate your emotions and the way that it made you feel, but then we could also have a broader conversation educating you about why people do the things they do. Or one of my beliefs as a therapist is that all behavior makes sense. And, with my clients, I will say this to them, and I'll say, if you or I can't make sense of it yet, we have to keep digging, we have to keep excavating, because when we get there, it will make sense. And so I think in a different way with you guys as kids, I wanted to help you understand and have that ability to look beyond just the details of what happened or how you felt, but to understand why people might do that and what might be going on for them, what might be happening in that relationship. And so I think that happens with you in a different way because you're not younger and growing up in that way. But I do think that having that knowledge and that understanding of concepts of human behavior helps to make sense of things, helps to give you that understanding that you need to make decisions and to make informed decisions.
Yeah, I think so. I think you actually hit the nail on the head with what I was trying to say, like you do. Also,
Yeah, I think that is something that I just learned, last year from you, is when you said that all behavior makes sense. And that made me angry because I was like, no, it doesn't. Just figure your shit out. Grow up. I'm very type A. So just like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Just stop doing that. Stop being manipulative. But I don't fully know that I fully accept that yet, but I'm learning to understand that all behavior makes sense. Like someone in their 20s or whatever it is, their behavior makes sense because of how they were raised or the traumatic thing that happened in their childhood or whatever it is. I don't know, just that's something that I learn something new every day.
That's exactly actually where I was going before my brain blanked, was the everybody makes sense. I think I've learned that from you, and I take it with me everywhere I go. For a lot of interactions, I'm like, no, this person makes sense. And when people come to me with like, their own problems and stuff, I kind of always keep that in the back of my head. And I think I've also told that to people. No, your reaction, like, that makes sense. Or like how you're acting right now, that makes sense. And I fully believe it at this point. I probably wouldn't have believed that like 6 years ago. But at this point, I fully believe it, and it makes the most sense in my brain. Yeah.
What was the situation in which you said that to Kelly? Oh, okay.
I guess we're not sharing the situation, but I think I probably said that verbatim. Yeah. And I don't know.
Literally in the kitchen about 3 hours ago, she said, "Mom, Grace isn't telling me that I'm right." But it was my fault when you spilled the milkshake.
Well, I don't think that necessarily means that you're right. I just think it means that what you're doing makes sense. And like, I don't
Well, and
think
I would say first we have a responsibility to understand our behavior and why we do what we do. And that's going to help develop our self-image and our self-understanding, and also to be accountable and to be able to be like, oh, that's mine. Or if somebody comes to us and says, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you did this and it hurt my feelings or whatever, we can be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I probably did. Maybe unintentionally, but I know that I can do this when I'm feeling whatever, right? And so I think as we start to make sense of and understand why we do what we do individually, we can then extend that a little bit easier to other people, and maybe not always understand why they do what they do, but we understand there's a reason behind it. And I think often having that curiosity or just that understanding the behavior does make sense can prevent judgment or being so dismissive with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that same subject, with the whole everybody makes sense thing, kind of steers me in the direction of like gaining more self-awareness. I think with that same topic of everybody makes sense, it's helped me to gain more self-awareness, whether it be like, oh, these are things I'm good at and these are things I'm like need some work on. Because I think oftentimes when people think self-awareness, we think like the negative things that we need to be aware of, or and so I think with that also comes being self-aware of where your strengths are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying that I can't just say because I'm type A, I'm a Virgo.
I think it's a little deeper. I think it is always a little bit deeper than just being type A and a Virgo.
I'm gonna be in therapy a lot longer.
Might want to start going weekly.
I only have money.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I appreciate you being willing to talk about this and to add your perspective and your voice to the conversation. And I will say at the end of this episode, which I hope you have enjoyed, remember that your story matters. There's something important in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.
Oh my god, that was so fun and cool to see you do your outro. Real